In the France 24 debate this evening, we'll help you make sense of what's going on in Iraq. No sooner had the last American soldiers left the country than a major political crisis erupted, once again along sectarian lines. Quick flashback. Last week, the government of Shiite Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki accused the Sunni vice president of heading a hit squad against Sunni officials. 3 days later, coordinated attacks killed at least 70 people in mostly Shiite neighborhoods. Now the government coalition that took 10 months to build is on the brink of collapse. The Sunni party is boycotting parliament, and a Shiite party loyal to Muqtada al-Sadr is calling for new elections. So can Iraq avoid breaking up? That's the question we'll be putting to our guests this evening. I'm joined on the set by Fouad Al-Obaid. Fouad, you're a France 24 regular. Thank you very much for being with us. Thanks. You're a Paris correspondent for the Kuwait Times, and you write mostly on the Kuwait and regional issues and on Iraq.
Yes, surrounding Kuwait.
We also have, via Skype connection from the southern French city of Marseille, Myriam Benrad, who's a research fellow on Middle East in Paris at the Sciences Po Research Center for International Relations, the CERI. And Ms. Benrad, you're author of a book called Iraq. And we're also joined by satellite link from Washington by Richard Weitz, senior fellow and director at the Center for Political Military Analysis at the Hudson Institute. Mr. Weitz, thank you very much for joining us. And it's also my pleasure to welcome on set James Andre, friend and colleague, France 24 international correspondent, who's just come back from Iraq. So James, you'll be giving us the latest from the field and also your impressions. The first question I want to ask, and I will ask this question to you, Richard, in Washington, is the violence that started just a few days after the Americans left is now prompting some Iraqis to ask the question, well, has the U.S. presence for 8 or 9 years brought us anything? Has it, apart from ousting Saddam Hussein, what good did it do us? What answer would you give them?
That's a good question. It is, of course, difficult to answer since it's a counterfactual. My sister works for NASA. She can run an experiment, change one variable, run the experiment again, and then see the difference. Us in political science, we don't know if there had been no invasion, if the troops had left sooner, if the troops had stayed longer, what the outcome would be. Of course, it'd be different. Where we are now, we're in the middle of a crisis. They've had crises before. They're able to resolve it. Maybe not this time. But you're right. I mean, many Americans, when they weigh up the costs and benefits of the war, would say it was a net loss. I mean, there's some benefits to the Iraqis, but there are a lot of costs to the Iraqis, a lot of costs to the Americans, and so on. But of course, our judgment will change. It'll be different a year from now. It'll be different 10 years from now. So the immediate question we're faced is how can we help Iraq to overcome the current crisis and perhaps put them in a position where they can go forward and make some progress?
Ms. Benrad, Miriam in Marseille, I'd like to put the same question to you. What would you say to an Iraqi that would tell you, and some people have been saying this, what have we gained from this? There is now political violence. At least under Saddam Hussein, there was some measure of stability.
Well, first I would like to say that my belief is that the whole debate around the U.S. Presence, and if the whole debate that consists in saying that if the U.S. had stayed longer, the situation would maybe be better or would have improved. I think it's a flawed debate because let's not forget the occupation has been, during the last years, one of the main actors of the ongoing violence. Violence that has been ongoing in Iraq for decades now, and not only for the last few years. So I think this debate is flawed, and I think that most of the dynamics today in Iraq are properly Iraqi, that the ongoing crisis opposes Iraqi forces most of all, and that it's been the case actually for the last few years. So we are witnessing, in some ways, the natural outcome of violence that has been ongoing again for decades, and that is taking a new turn these days.
James Andre, France 24 international correspondent. You came back from Iraq, what, about a week, 10 days ago?
Yeah, that's it. A week.
You were there in the last few days before you left, is when the political crisis erupted with the Shiite Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, his government issuing an arrest warrant against the Sunni Vice President.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
How does it feel on the ground? Of course, there's an immediate impact with the violence. That happened 2 days after you left, I believe. But could you feel the effects of the political crisis?
You could indeed feel tension. I mean, for starters, you could see the whole country was covered in flags, the colors of the Shia majority, because it's Ashura, which is a very important pilgrimage for the Shia religion, and so you had flags all over the place, and we had Sunnis saying, this is not normal. We're not used to this. Why are there flags everywhere, including on military checkpoints or on official buildings, which are supposed to be neutral and not be neither Sunni or Shia? So you could tell that there was a real pressure there, and the Sunnis were complaining about that. You were asking
You felt the Shiite majority was overbearing and was leaning on...
I mean, we spoke to a lot of people, including in Sadr City, for example, which is a Sadrist neighborhood where people, followers of Muqtada al-Sadr, who is a quite radical Shia leader over there in Iraq, and who is an important political figure. They have 41 members of parliament who are part of this party. And I mean, we saw the Ashura there, and we spoke to the people, and they were very pleased to see the Americans go. You could tell that the Shia majority is there to try and gain as much power as they can in this void that the Americans have just left, because this is kind of what you feel is happening. It's like the Americans have left; they've left a void, and all the former opponents to Saddam Hussein are just finding themselves head on. And there's no
buffer zone between the various parties now. There's no judge, there's no referee to stop to calm the fighting. Is that what you're saying?
What's happening at the moment is that kind of the Kurdistan is kind of becoming this sort of referee, but still what's really happening is that it's a bit of a head-on clash, and with also a lot of impact from Iran, which is trying to bear down on what's going on in Iraq right now. And I mean, that is something that you can also tell. I mean, for example, there have been some meetings, and Kurdish politicians have been speaking to the press and saying that the Iranian officials, military people, military personnel, and also intelligence people have been coming in and talking to everybody and trying to influence the political situation over there. So it's quite surprising what's going on.
Well, we're going to be talking about the intervention of foreign countries and neighbors such as Iran, such as Saudi Arabia, a little later on. But first, I'd like to listen to the Iraqi foreign minister, Mr. Hoshyar Zebari, who explained how big a challenge this was for Iraq.
The biggest challenge Iraq faces after the U.S. pullout is a political one, not one of security. This crisis came at the wrong time for the Iraqi situation. It has come after the pullout of the last American, after a successful visit made by Iraqi Prime Minister and the Iraqi delegation to Washington to hold agreements for the next phase.
Fouad Al-Ubaid, correspondent for the Kuwait Times, were you surprised by this political crisis that came so soon after the Americans pulled out?
Well, I really can't say that I'm surprised. And in fact, I mean, a lot of, in my classes that I took in the past several years, I mean, the war has plunged for the past 8-9 years, as we clearly stated. The question, even at the ongo of the war and the crisis, was what's going to happen once the Americans pull out. And a lot of people, a lot of commentators seem to agree that chaos would be the natural outcome. And one of the reasons for chaos
you were
to
expecting this, or something like this?
I was, in a sense, I was expecting it as much as most people were expecting it. Because, I mean, what happens when you have a state that has been, I mean, literally broken down into different factions? You actually have different parties that were in conflict in 2006 to 2008, basically a pseudo-civil war. You don't really have a centralized authority that is capable of rallying everyone together towards a centralized state. And so what happens once the main pillars of, I mean, the glue, basically, the glue they run together, the Americans and their presence, left, was probably a breakdown and an exasperation, I think, of tensions that has been mounting.
So the glue that was sticking the various elements of the population, the various groups, including in parliament, the glue that was sticking them together has gone.
Pretty much. I mean, they're common. I mean, the Americans were seen as liberators in the beginning, but that was back in 2003, 2004. They stayed on for a long while with no clear mission of what they really tried to establish, and different parties started to attack one another. You had the Shia that had clear grievances against the Sunni majority that ruled under Saddam, that was pretty much tyrannical towards them and their beliefs, and now you have a reverse effect whereby the Shiites are trying to take over the minority Sunnis. And that, on the other hand, is bringing in different regional elements into the question, where you have, basically the Gulf Cooperation Council that are as majority Sunni, and you have other countries also that are majority Sunni that are backing.
All right, but hold on. Before we talk about the various neighbors' interventions in Iraq, and we will get to that, I want to ask a question. I'm going to put this one to you, Richard, in Washington. Does Iraq have an adequate system of representation and governance? Because it is one of the things that the United States have been trying to build up over the last few years.
Well, it's a very complicated country, as we've been discussing. You've got a Shiite minority, which is newly empowered. You've got a Shiite majority. You've got a Sunni minority that was in power, has lost it, and is not too happy about that. You've got Kurds in the north who ideally would like to be an independent country, but they know they can't because the Turks and the Iraqis won't let them. So they've sort of accommodated themselves to the central authority for the time being. And among that mix, the Americans tried to think of, what's a just system. So you want to allow one person, one vote. You want to allow peaceful opportunities to participate in politics so that you don't have people resort to violence. You want to ensure protection for minority rights, for religious rights, allow some federalism, but not so much federalism that you split the country, although they considered that for a while. And they sort of came out with the best they could. But it's tough because on top of all that, you're ending up with elections where it's very closely divided. As we recall, there was a couple seats separating the two top parties, so you had to form a coalition. Ideally, you'd end up with the situation you have in the United States, in which there's so many cross-cutting cleavages that people will some day think of themselves as Shiite, another day will think of themselves as a business person, the next time think of themselves as a woman, and so on, so that you'd have fluctuating coalitions. And they tried to form this grand coalition, but it appears that the animosities that have built up over time and that were exacerbated by the Civil War are such it's going to take a while to dissipate. So you're going to end up with more, the sectorian cleavages and the are just so strong that they haven't been diluted yet.
Are you saying that the Iraq has inherited a good political system, but it's just a country that's currently ungovernable because of the depth of resentment between various communities?
Yeah, I think that, it's hard for me to think of a better political structure formally. Democratic system, mixture, federalism. There is, of course, some problems. You've got a weak institution still. So you've got a strong prime ministership, but all the other bodies in the country are still kind of weak. So that's why they tried to build up a Security Council. They tried to pull away the Minister of Interior and the Ministry of Defense from the Prime Minister and so on, and that hasn't worked out yet. So you right now have the same situation as in Russia. You have a very strong central Kremlin, or in this case, strong Prime Minister, and weak institutions everywhere else, so not balancing. So I think what you have is a system that could be made to function, but it's got to be less on paper and more operationalized. So there has to be more power given to the parliament, more power given to other institutions. You have to have voting less by sectarianism and so on. So I'm not sure. The alternative you could end up with is where we're sort of heading, is having a strong Saddam-like leader who's able to suppress all these tensions and so on. But that's not good from the point of justice, so it may be good from the point of stability.
And it's actually interesting that you would say that, because the deputy prime minister whom Nouri al-Maliki is trying to get rid of, a Sunni, has actually used the same words in saying this was a Saddam-like dictatorship under Maliki. James, I saw you were nodding while Richard was speaking.
I just wanted to remind everybody that back in 2010, there were actually elections. I mean, this resentment between the Sunnis and Shiites, I mean, the recent part, I'm not talking about the actual civil war that raged between 2007 2008, but, you know, the government problem started in 2010 when, in the election, actually the Iraqi party, led by Yad Alawi, technically won the election.
The Sunni party, now led by the Vice President, Mr. Hashimi.
Exactly, but the thing is, he did not become he did not become the prime minister. I mean, it was Nouri al-Maliki that became the prime minister because that's how the coalition worked out. But still, that did fuel a lot of resentment. And you've got to remember that just before the Americans left, there are still some ministry seats that were not actually, you know, taken. That nobody was manning these positions, I think.
What?
Well, I would like to comment on the question of the violence and on the resentment between the two main grieving parties, the Sunnis and the Shiites. I mean, what we have seen ever since 2003, 2004, really from the on-go, was the fact that you don't really have a strong judiciary capable of applying the law equally on all. You have people that are grieved, you have Sunnis being attacked by Shiites, Shiites then countering, attacking Sunnis, and vice versa, and you have a revenge cycle that's very nasty that has led to a lot of murders. And I think unless you can create a strong judiciary system that's capable of applying, I mean, capable of dealing with the grievances that a lot of people that have seen their brothers, mothers, fathers killed in atrocious attacks resolved, then I think the question of unity will kind of be out there in the air. Also, another issue is the fact that, you know, a strong Iraq is something that a lot of countries in the region don't really want to see. I mean, that's reminiscent of an Iraq that's expansionist, an Iraq that has been into war with Iran and with Kuwait, respectively in the 90s and in the 80s. And also, alternatively, a weak Iraq is a danger for a lot of the countries. An Iraq that is open for grabs by different parties, whether, you know, legitimate countries or terrorist organizations or whatnot.
On this question of the influence that neighbors can have on domestic politics in Iraq, Miriam Ben-Rad, I want to bring you back into the discussion. The two names are often mentioned, Iran and Saudi Arabia. Just how much influence would you say they have on domestic politics in Iraq?
I will answer this question, but I think I would like maybe to add a few points on what has been said previously. I don't think, for my part, that Iraqi politics can be reduced to sectarianism. There are clearly sectarian connotations to the ongoing crisis through the fact that the vice president is a Sunni, the fact that Nouri al-Maliki is himself a Shiite, that we've been witnessing this sectarian violence for a few years now. But again, it's important to say that it's the present situation is also the result of the governance system of the governance that was put in place by the Americans in 2003 along sectarian and ethnic quotas, and not along proper national project for the country. And this is so let's not forget that this has also fed into the present violence, the sectarian violence. And also,
Miriam Ben-Rad, what you're essentially
Yes?
saying is that the political system that the Americans helped set up actually sowed the seeds of the political crisis or the multiple political crises that we're seeing now. We're going to bring you back in to part two of this debate right after this break.